Hello and welcome to our live session within the series of Future Law webinars leading to the main event in May next year. Today, we are hosting Uwais Iqbal, a brilliant mind and legal AI guru capable of answering any question about legal AI or its implementation into law practice. Uwais is trusted by leading law firms worldwide, and he has trained alone over 3,000 legal professionals. Please leave your comments here on LinkedIn in the comments section, and I'll make sure to prompt to Uwais GPT. Well, Uwais, we've been through a lot for the past 3 years. Use AI or not to use, have strategy on it, or just go with the wind and see how it goes. What's your take on it? And most importantly, why?
Thanks for having me, Valentin. I'm not sure if I'm a GPT or a human.
It's just a
It,
joke. Joke. Yeah.
it's good to be here and it's good to be talking to you again. Yeah, I think it's been an interesting couple of years, and now I think people have got to a space where the hype is starting to fade a little bit. People are realizing that it's not as easy as just buying a very shiny, expensive piece of AI. It's a lot more complex to actually create value with the technology in interesting ways. But there's been, as we've seen, widespread interest. Everybody's aware of AI. Everybody's using AI in some way, shape, or form. Everyone's interested about it. So that's been a positive. And I think what's interesting now is that now that we're in a space where AI is not very unfamiliar. Previously, it was unfamiliar and it took time for people to understand. But now we're in a space where people are understanding it a lot more. I think there's a lot more deeper questions we can get into in terms of understanding what best practices there are, avoiding mistakes, and how to actually make the most of the technology in a valuable way. So I think, yeah, the things are moving in a positive direction, I think.
And that's a great sign because we all need to move in the positive direction. But is there any AI journey emerging for law firms and legal teams from your perspective?
I think so. So what we're seeing is that I should introduce myself. My name is Uwais. So my background is an AI engineer, data scientist. So I've been actually building and coding AI systems, production AI systems in the legal sector for about a decade. And around 3 years ago, I started Simplexico, where we've been doing AI consulting for law firms and legal teams, and we offer everything from education to use case design, discovery and design, through to bespoke implementation of AI solutions. So as part of the work we've been doing with law firms and legal teams, we're starting to see the emergence of an AI journey that people are at different stages, people are doing different things, but there is this general kind of journey we can describe where people are coming, they're interested in AI, so they do some form of education, they learn about the technology, they understand what it can and can't do. Then they move into a space of use cases, exploration. So discovering use cases, prioritizing them, categorizing them, strategizing those into business cases, and then going deeper into actually designing those use cases into potential AI initiatives or AI projects, or creating an entire roadmap around it. And then that's where the strategy conversation comes in terms of what use cases do you prioritize? How do you prioritize those use cases? What approach do we want to take more generally as a firm? And then once there are use cases clear within the firm, then there is that question of, do we build or do we buy? Do we go out to market to procure something, or do we build something internally for whatever reason, whether we want to create an internal capability or whether it makes more sense for us to build? So there's that implementation piece. And then after that, it moves into a space of adoption. How do we make sure to support adoption and change management with the implementation and rollout of the technology? And then there's long-term maintenance and upkeep in terms of how do we keep people engaged and keep people thinking about the technology and using the technology, so that adoption is maintained over a significant period of time. And we can roughly bucket those into, I think, 6 or 7 steps. And it's not a linear process by any means. People, for example, they go out to market and they buy a tool, and then they realize nobody understands anything about AI, so then they have to go back and do education. And sometimes people They find use cases, and then they start building without thinking about adoption or without thinking about change management. So people are taking different approaches, and sometimes it seems a bit scattered. But if you kind of stand back and try and like picture what different people are doing and how different people are approaching it, we can basically um, um, identify these buckets of education, use case discovery, use case design, build versus buy, adoption, and then support and maintenance or kind of enablement more generally over a longer period of time. So that's kind of the AI journey we're seeing. And it's not as though you do like one step and then you're done forever. It's a continuous process of trying to address each of these to an extent where you can create progress, create value, create momentum, and then move in a positive direction.
That sounds like a great challenge, but still, people tend to look for simpler use cases. What's the best way to go about discovering and designing use cases?
So the best way to go about discovering and designing use cases is a good question. So a lot of times people they bring in a tool. For example, they'll bring in something like ChatGPT Enterprise or Microsoft Copilot, and they'll make that available across the organization. And the thinking is that if we give people the technology, they're able to play with it, they're able to come up with ideas, they're able to have a eureka moment saying, "Oh, I can use AI to do X, Y, and Z." So there's a technology-driven approach to uncovering use cases where people use the tech and they realize, "Oh, I can use it for X, Y, and Z." The other approach is more organic. It's where it comes from the domain experts themselves. So we run these types of workshops where we get in a room with subject matter experts, domain experts, practicing lawyers, partners, for example, and then we bring in technologists, engineers, AI architects, AI people effectively, and try and get them to think together about use cases and how use cases can be discovered and designed. So we've at simplexico we've created an entire framework around how we can discover use cases and how you can design them, and we have what are called the legal AI actions. So those are actions where lawyers are performing those actions on a day-to-day basis, but now we can see AI being used in those areas. So for example, you have things like extraction, labeling information, drafting information, summarizing information, finding information, interrogating information, transcribing information, translating information, interrogating information. So anywhere lawyers or legal professionals are conducting those activities and those actions, those are candidate opportunities for applying AI. And that begins your discussion around a use case. So you can think as a lawyer, where am I extracting lots of information? Or where am I spending a lot of time interrogating documents or interrogating evidence? And when you think about those areas, those emerge as use cases where you can think, okay, this is an entire workflow. This is how lawyers have been doing it in the past. Now in the future, can we imagine how AI could be introduced, and that becomes a candidate use case. So it's not a well-defined science, but there is a lot we can borrow in terms of design thinking methodology and just innovation generally to help push that type of creative thinking and that creative energy to get people to think about use cases.
That's really interesting, and I really like any approach that is focused on design thinking because it's the way we actually keep human in the loop when using AI. We have a question from the audience. It's Scott McCarthy, IT application specialist from iManage. Uh, uh, he's asking, is the industry as a whole leaning towards any one path built by partner in particular? If so, why do you think is that?
That's a good question. So I think it's too early to say. I think a large part of the industry is still buying, traditionally because that's what they're familiar with, and their organization is structured to enable buying. So they have procurement, they have purchasing, they have security, and all of that configured in a way where the natural stance to the market is to buy. But I think what's interesting is that what we're seeing are more than previously with software, particularly now with AI, more and more firms are thinking about building internally. And then there's different kind of grades of building. Like you can build at a very extreme level where you're building everything from scratch. You can build at another level where you're leveraging, for example, things from a cloud provider like Azure or Amazon Web Services and then building on top of those platforms. Or you could kind of take a Harvey or a Legora or a Copilot and then build on top of those platforms because they have those capabilities. So I think lots of the industry is still within the space of buying. But I think a lot of what we're realizing when we're working with firms is that the difficult part isn't the technology or the platform. The difficult part is how do you take the workflow that lawyers have and the way they work and lay that on top of a technical solution so that they can work within that solution, if that makes sense. So it's more about workflow and interface and user experience. A lot more of the industry is open to partnering now because they've realized that buying isn't going to be sufficient. We've seen law firms go out, spend millions and millions on expensive legal AI solutions, bring it into the organization, but fail miserably with adoption. And they have this buyer's remorse that we've spent so much on this technology, nobody's using it, it's just shiny tech. And we've seen a lot of that, not just with AI, but with other technologies previously as well. So that's the challenge with buying. With building, the challenge is that because AI is such an unfamiliar thing, and it's at the forefront and the cutting edge of technology, law firms are so far away in terms of the delta of understanding technology and creating the culture and the ecosystem for building that trying to build AI from the get-go is very difficult because there's this massive gap in terms of technical understanding, technical culture, technical awareness, and even infrastructure to be able to build from scratch. So building is very, very challenging. So more firms are opening to this space of partnering where either they bring in a platform or they bring in people like us at Simplexico and we work together to try and create these solutions. I think the really interesting thing is that with AI, software is being commoditized. So now these AI models are able to generate code and write software. And we're using this in the work we do with some of our customers. We're using AI to help us build AI solutions. That now building software becomes very easy. So the value really lies in actually the workflow element or helping or leveraging the data and the expertise the lawyers actually have. So law firms are set up in a really interesting way. So most law firms have access to a cloud environment or an Azure tenant where they can access the same large language models and the same AI engines which are powering ChatGPT and Claude and Copilot. So the engines are available for the law firms within their cloud environments. And then if you're able to take those engines, create that right interface of software, combine it with the workflow, combine it with the right bits of data for that legal workflow, then you're able to create what we call a bespoke solution for a particular workflow. And in a concrete example, that might look like in a law firm, they have a particular workflow for generating lease reviews, which is pretty standardized and it's pretty routine. There's a bunch of documents which come in. There's a standard review which is conducted on those documents, and then it's compared against some benchmark, and then there's some analysis which is provided. You could go and buy an expensive piece of tech from the market to help you do that, or you could try and do it in Microsoft Copilot with lots and lots of prompts, but it's going to get unwieldy because there's so many prompts and so many documents. It's not very easy from a user experience to do that. Or you could take the LLM, which is available within your Azure environment, create a thin software layer or interface specifically for that lease review use case. And then the lawyers who use the application, they don't have to worry about prompting. They press a couple of buttons and then the lease review is generated and all of the prompting and the complex workflow and data manipulation is happening behind the interface. So we're seeing that emerge as what we call a workbench, where people are wanting these types of applications because having a prompt window isn't the right type of interface for lawyers because it's expecting too much of the user. So what we have to do is try and offload the workflow and the data and the legal aspects into the application so the user just has to worry about pressing a couple of buttons. So we're seeing an interesting trend. People are moving in different directions. Some law firms have said, no, we're not going to build, we're just going to buy. But then there's challenges with that. Some law firms have said we're going to build internally, but there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of creating, procuring the talent and creating the infrastructure and the culture for them to be able to do them. But then I think the sweet spot is where law firms are thinking about partnering. So we have, I don't know if I can share my screen, but this is something we've put together as a framework to help people think through this. That um, let me see if I can.
Perfectly seen.
Yeah, great. So this is a framework we've been putting together to help people understand and make sense of the different options when it comes to build versus buy. So if we basically just ask these two questions, if we have a use case in mind, and the whole starting point is having this use case in mind. If we have a use case in mind, we can ask these two basic questions. How valuable is it strategically? Is it low value or is it high value? And then the second question we can ask is, how urgent do we need this solution? Is it low urgency or is it high urgency? And if we think about those four options, we get four outcomes. So if something is low strategic value and it's low urgency, then it's probably better to defer it or to pilot a tool because it's not something which is critical, it's not something which is make or break, right? So where benefits are uncertain or timing isn't critical, we can run a small experiment, we can protect budget, satisfy governance, and use that as learnings to inform future AI approaches or AI initiatives. But on the other hand, if the strategic value is high, but the urgency is low, then we can think about building because we want to own the capability. So when the capability could, for example, be connected to client service or materially reduce enterprise risk, or firms want to create some IP around a particular workflow, and you own the data logic, where you own the data, the logic, the roadmap secures lasting a competitive moat. So you create some IP around it. And then if you're in a space where it's high urgency, but the strategic value is low, then you can go out to market and buy something because those use cases are pretty standardized and everybody in the market is doing those use cases. So the market has created products for everyone to be able to purchase. So those are best for proven non-differentiating functions that must go live fast. So it's something that's readily available. You go out and purchase it and you can deploy it. I mean, fast is a relative term in the legal industry. Even buying a tool could take 6 to 9 months within a law firm. And then the other option is partner. So if it's high strategic value and it's high urgency, where you need material results quickly, but then it's important to maintain some control, and you want to accelerate getting to a solution, then you can partner with somebody like Simplexico, where we come in and we build that solution together with you. So you have these different options available, but which option you go down depends on the use case you have at hand. So we call these the delivery pathways, and your delivery pathway has to be informed by the use case, the specific use case you're thinking about, and how you're approaching AI within your organization. And lots of people are within that kind of partner build space. They're buying the technology, and the vendors have realized this themselves. So some of the vendors, for example, now they have workflow capabilities where you can build in workflows to their tool because they're realizing that just having a standard prompt window isn't sufficient. You need something additional. But then who's going to go in there, do the work of, okay, we need to work with the lawyers, we need to understand how they're working, and we need to create this workflow within the platform. So there is that realization happening that beyond the technology, there's this additional layer of workflow which is needed to be able to make the tech more valuable.
As always, organization structure comes first, and you need to prepare people for any implementation. They need to adapt oneself with the idea to use or implement something into their workflows.
Yeah.
That's totally understandable. Well, when we are talking about implementation of legal AI, we usually talk about top law firms. And those law firms, they do exist for many, many years, decades, or even
Mhm.
hundreds of years. So it's all about long-term value. Is there a longer-term value in building or in buying, in your point of view, if to be precise and short about it, in order to understand this precisely, you know?
Right. That's a really good question. Okay. So I think the we have to understand what are we optimizing for. If we're optimizing for short-term gains in terms of positioning and marketing, I think buying is a good way to go because you can buy something and within 6 to 9 months, then you can go through the procurement cycles, make sure everything's there, bring in the technology, and then you can then say we have X tool where like we're cutting edge and we're part of the modern law firm or the AI revolution. But the lasting value of buying tools is to be questioned, right? Because if you buy in a tool which is very general purpose, we're seeing that people aren't knowing how to use these tools effectively because it's like a blank canvas. You have to do additional work to get people to use it. And what we're seeing is that from the types of tools available on the market, there's a spectrum which is emerging. So on the one hand, there's microwaves, and these microwaves are general purpose tools. So you have your ChatGPT, you have your Microsoft Copilot. These are your general purpose consumer tools which do things, do try to do everything, but aren't really good for legal work. And then somewhere in the middle, you have pizza ovens. And pizza ovens are your AI tools or your AI applications which are developed for a particular legal practice. For example, you might have a specialized AI application which is dedicated to helping you draft patent reviews. It doesn't do anything else. So those are pizza ovens. You can just cook one thing with it. You can just make one thing with it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have a personal chef. And then that's where we sit at Simplexico, where the chef can speak to you, can understand what your taste is, what you enjoy. The chef can use your own ingredients and actually make you a dish which is what you want basically, and you'll enjoy the dish and you'll eat the dish. So we have this spectrum of microwaves, of pizza ovens, and of personal chefs. And then the question almost becomes that we have to think about for a use case, is this a microwave type of use case where a microwave will be really good? Is this a pizza oven type of use case where we can go to market and there will be a tool available for us to use straight away? Or is this a use case where it needs something a bit more? It's not a pizza, it might be a souffle. It's more of a signature dish where we want some kind of finesse and fidelity around how it's being created and the way it's presented and how it's served to clients and so on and so forth. So this question of fidelity comes about. And I think if you ask the question of last long-term value, I think a lot of legal work falls into the microwave realm. So that can be offloaded to microwave tools, your ChatGPT, and I think Harvey Ligora, they sit somewhere between microwaves and pizza ovens. They're very general purpose. They're not very specific to a particular type of workflow. So the question then becomes for lasting value within the legal industry. If we have these tools and these technology, the use cases which are emerging, some of them are microwave use cases, some of them are pizza oven use cases, and the majority of them, I think the majority of the strategic ones are personal chef types of use cases. So then the question around lasting value becomes, okay, one option isn't going to suit everything. We can't just buy and sit around and say, we've bought AI, we've bought this piece of kit, that's it, we're done, right? That's not enough. You can't just build one solution and say, hey, look, we've built this really shiny solution for our clients, and then we're done with AI. Okay. So if you walk into a law firm, there's not just one electrical appliance. There's hundreds of electrical appliances running at the same time doing different things with different functions, right? So you have a printer, you might still have a fax machine, you've got the lights, you've got the computer monitors, you've got the air conditioning. So all of these are electrical appliances which all have different functions. So I think we have to start seeing AI as not just this one thing that if we buy something we check the box. We have to start thinking of it as how can we incorporate AI into different aspects of what we're doing as a law firm, whether that's on the business side, whether that's on the practice side, and even within individual practice groups, within individual workflows, how can AI be used in those areas? And then once we have this view of, okay, it's not just going to be one tool, it's not just going to be one purchase, it's not just going to be one build project, it's going to be something which is going to come into everything which is happening within the law firm, then we take a different view in terms of lasting value. So if you buy something from market, you're basically paying down your ignorance or your lack of knowledge and understanding for AI by purchasing from the market and accepting what the vendor is providing. Okay. But that's that's very problematic at the same time because AI is such a strategic technology, especially for law firms. If you're delaying your knowledge and your awareness of AI, are you missing opportunities for transforming your law firm or your legal practice because AI can actually have such an impact if you understand it and if you use it in the right way. So building is really valuable initially, I think, for law firms to actually get involved in building or at least partnering because it gives you that knowledge and understanding and that awareness of what actually goes into building an AI system. You're much closer to the technology, and when you're much closer to how to build, you're able to understand in a lot more detail and a lot more nuance all of the different areas where AI could be deployed in a law firm, and you're actually aware of what the implementation might look like. Whereas if you're buying, you're basically missing a massive opportunity to think about those opportunities and think about those areas for enablement with AI. So there's pros and cons on both sides, but I think the interesting thing is that with buying technology, law firms are giving up some degree of knowledge, but then they're also giving up some degree of control, right? Because when they're putting data into a vendor, the vendor who owns the IP around that data, right? If you're building a workflow into a vendor's application, who owns the IP around that workflow? Is it you as a law firm or is it the vendor themselves? If you wanted to migrate from one vendor to another and you wanted to take your workflows with you, can you take your workflows with you? And that's becomes a reputation question. It also becomes a risk question because if all of the law firms' expertise and knowledge and assets are embedded within one vendor platform, then that exposes the law firm to a significant amount of risk because if that vendor goes bust or that vendor leverages that expertise in other ways, then that's a big problem for a law firm. So I think that
Precisely.
there are some of these
Yeah.
higher level questions that people aren't thinking about when they're going out to market to buy things, right? So one thing I can share with you is this additional framework we've put together. Let's see if I can share it with you. We're
But
calling it.
what I've just heard is that building is more valuable if we are talking about a long-term goal for a law firm. And from this, I must say, I have a big question. Why then so many top law firms are implementing all the same product? Or at
This,
least a few of the same products. And it becomes a total mainstream. And when I see it, I see that it is actually a great risk for all of them.
I, I think there's a couple of elements at play, right? So I think there's a lot of pressure for law firms to demonstrate they're doing something with AI. So in order to I guess, demonstrate to the market, demonstrate to the board, demonstrate to clients that we're doing something with AI. Purchasing one of these few vendors is a good positioning play, right? And that's fine. I mean, that's fine as if that's the intention. But
But
then
still, I'm
there's a
sorry
lot of
for
risk.
interrupting. But still, just imagine you're a top law firm that is actually building a great community around their law firm around the world. It exists, for example, for hundreds of years, and you are actually delegating all workflows, knowledge, data to a legal tech startup.
So this might help the the conversation because this is can you see that the legal AI stack?
Yes,
Right.
perfectly.
So this is the question because when when we're thinking about software, software is one dimensional, right? It does something, but there isn't any significant strategic value in most cases within software, right? That's contained within the data, and then the software and the data are separate kind of assets, and you can disentangle them. But with AI, it becomes a lot more complex because the data is interleaved with the workflow, and there's all of these different components. So we've tried to, based on the conversations we've been having with customers and the work we're doing with them, we're trying to disambiguate the layers of the legal AI stack, right? And we think in our analysis, we think there are these five layers, right? So you have the cloud and the security foundations, and this is usually how do we make sure that the data is secure. There's nothing being shared with a third party. Everything is up to compliance, and there's trust boundaries and networking and encryption and infrastructure is all up to the standards of compliance and security needed. So all of that happens in that kind of layer of the stack. And then on top of that is the large language models. And then the functional large language models are basically the AI engine which powers the capability. So you can think of that as your GPT-4 or your kind of Llama model which powers the capability. And then you have the software layer, which is the back-end orchestration or the APIs which interact and orchestrate the language model. And then that connects to a downstream application. And then the downstream application is usually consisting of some combination of domain data and some level of retrieval. And then, so there's an embedding layer, there's some embedding, indexing, and integration layer that turns firm-specific data and insights into intelligence that can be interacted with and manipulated and used through the large language model, right? So that's the data layer. And on top of that, there's the final layer, which is the prompt layer or the workflow layer or the user interface, which the users are actually interacting with. So that's the prompts, workflow, evaluation tests, and user interface that deliver the final experience that users actually see, right? So at each of these layers, it can either be owned by the vendor, it can either be owned by the law firm, the internal law firm themselves, or there can be some combination of ownership. It's co-owned across the two. Okay. So in most cases, if you're buying, then the vendor is owning the entire stack. That's the whole point of buying, right? So the vendor owns the entire stack. But then, as you said, that becomes very risky because what's valuable is your data and your workflow logic, but then you're handing that over to a legal AI startup without
Exactly.
realizing.
It's the value of the business. Otherwise, there are only people who
Yeah,
are left in the firm, and that's it. And you cannot actually possess a business if it's only about people and services. You need to create products. You need to create value, assets behind all this. And if you delegate everything to a tech vendor, that's a
yeah.
big question whether
It's
you are
it,
doing the right thing,
it's a big
right?
question, and it's a very risky question because, like you said, if these law firms have been around for hundreds of years, they've developed all of this expertise and reputation and skill and knowledge, and then they're just handing that over to a legal AI startup, just to say that we're using AI. Is that a worthwhile risk? I'm not sure. Right. So when you're buying, most of these are usually owned by the vendor, but sometimes the prompt and workflow logic, you're providing it as the law firm, but is it owned by the vendor? Is it owned by you? Is it co-owned? Sometimes that's a bit fuzzy, right? So if you're building these workflows into your legal AI tooling, then can you take those workflows out? Can you take that data out? Can you migrate it from one vendor to another? Those are unanswered questions. Those are open questions. If you're building, then you basically have control over the entire stack, right? So you have control over the cloud foundations. You can be very specific about where the data is processed in terms of regions, so that and jurisdictions, so that you can meet data residency requirements. You can make sure data is protected. With the large language models, you can, for example, you can use cloud-based large language models. You can use open source large language models, so things are more secure. You basically build the software layer yourself. The data is yours, so you own that, and then you own the prompt and the workflow logic around that because you're building that all from scratch yourself. So you have more control and transparency and visibility over what's happening. And then what's interesting is that when you're partnering, this is a conversation or a negotiation to say who owns which part of the stack based on what's important, based on what's not important. And then when we're working with law firms, this is usually a conversation to say, okay, it makes more sense rather than us as simplexico owning the cloud and the security foundations. It makes more sense for us to come into your organization and use your cloud instead because it's more secure. So like we use the customer's cloud. For example, there can be vendor-owned LLMs or there can be open source LLMs, and depending on what the right setup is, you can choose one of those, right? But then the interesting thing is that the software layer and then the domain layer or the data layer is co-owned, or there's some negotiation around who owns which pieces, and then ultimately the prompt and the workflow logic is owned by the law firm, but then we build it, right? So there's some negotiation that happens around, okay, we're going to build this, but ultimately it's yours because it's your IP, and then we negotiate around that. So buying is one extreme where the vendor owns everything, and then building is another extreme where you own everything. But then partnering is this kind of like negotiation between who should own what and what should be co-owned. And I think you're entirely right that as law firms are buying just senselessly without thinking about what they're giving up, there is this stack which is important to understand that if you're buying what you're giving up and if you're building what
Doesn't
you're
it
able to
feel like a
maintain,
short-term decision? No?
it does feel like a short-term decision. And I think people they've understood AI as something um, something significant, but I don't think they've understood the strategic value AI could play within the context of the law firm and the future of their law firm.
It usually all comes down to money. What is cheaper actually, to buy or to build? Probably many law firms they think that building is too expensive to build, too expensive to maintain, too expensive to hire and actually build teams, tech teams within a law firm. Some of them do
Mhm.
and do it actually successfully. I know
Yeah.
quite a few law firms in the Nordic that have built their own products and successfully implementing
Mhm.
them. But still, it's a big question whether building is that expensive that buying is an ultimate way to go further about it, not to be missing out
So
person.
it depends because I think there's different kind of pressure points. One pressure point is employees asking for some AI tooling. Another pressure point is the board saying, why haven't we done anything with AI yet? Another pressure point is clients saying, what are you doing with AI? We're using AI. Why aren't you using AI? Another pressure point is competition. What's the rest of the market doing? And I think when some of those things add up and it comes to a point where law firms are buying tooling, I think they're buying tooling because of those pressures. But you're right. I think what we've seen in terms of the build projects we've done with customers, building is a lot cheaper and a lot faster than actually buying, right? So if you're
Really?
buying, really, really, so if you're buying, a procurement cycle can take anywhere between 6 to 9 to 12 months with a law firm, and then there's all of these security requirements you have to go through, and then when the tool comes into the firm, there's still a lot of change management that needs to happen in terms of training and upskilling because you want to maximize adoption, but then adoption is still a challenge, right? So
What
that's one,
about the maintenance?
right? So if you're buying
For
something, you don't.
example, for example, you've built a product for your law firm.
Mhm.
Uh, you use it daily. Next
Yeah.
year, it's an outdated product, isn't it? Isn't it a problem here?
So let me explain, right? So if you're buying something, you're doing all of these things and bringing something into the firm, and then there's still these challenges around change management, around training, and adoption isn't that great. Even from law firms who've done this and they've done the training, adoption is still poor because they've got general purpose technology which doesn't kind of fit any one use case. It's just kind of general. If you flip the script and you say, okay, let's focus on a targeted use case, a concrete use case, and for that specific use case, let's build a solution. But the way we're going to build is we're going to leverage lots of other existing platforms so that we can do that. So we leverage Microsoft Azure, we leverage, for example, other LLMs like open source LLMs or cloud-based LLMs. And then all we're going to do is build this software layer and this user interface layer, which is once there's a methodology to it, which is what we're building at Simplexico. But once you figure out how to do that, the technology components which make up use cases are usually the same, right? So there has to be some um, retrieval of documents. There has to be some extraction of information. There has to be some classification of information. There has to be some drafting of a decision or generating some content. There has to be some ability to interrogate documents. So from a tech standpoint, what we're seeing is that those components are reusable across multiple use cases because for a use case, the only thing that's different is the data and the workflow, but the technology which powers it is the same. So we've built this out for customers, and we're seeing that customers are asking for different workflows, but the technology underneath is basically the same. So once you've built this out and you've built out the capability for one of these types of use cases, it's very easy to then take that same technology and use it to power other use cases. And the interesting thing is that because you're leveraging the cloud-based LLMs and you're leveraging the Azure platform, there isn't a lot to do once you've done one of these use cases. It's like laying down train tracks, right? Once you've put down the train tracks, it's easy to get the train running. It's just that first step which is quite difficult. And like you said around maintenance, maintenance is a challenge that the software can become out of date or the models can become out of date. So that is one of the downsides of building, that you have to think about maintenance, you have to think about upkeep. But then at the same time, are you what are you willing to give up? Are you willing to lose control over your data and workflows, or are you willing to pay for maintenance or make sure things are kept up to date? So there's pros and cons on both sides. But the way we usually work with customers is that once we do a build for them, we build a solution, a bespoke solution for them, then we stay in touch with them as part of their ecosystem of suppliers so that we can maintain solutions over time. And if there's any updates to the model or any changes, we can still do those types of things. So I think there are pros and cons on both sides, but like you said, it depends what we're seeing, what the objective is, and where ultimate value is for a law firm. And what we're seeing the for this approach of having targeted use cases with bespoke builds, adoption is baked in, right? Because you're building something for a specific group of people and you're designing the user interface for those specific individuals for that small team. And once you roll it out, people are using it day in, day out because it becomes their workbench of where they're actually doing their work. So we've seen this in terms of, and we've got stats for this and we've got numbers for this, where we've got crazy adoption. So we built a workbench for an adjudication team who do end of tenancy disputes between tenants and landlords. We built this custom solution for them, and it took us 3 months to build, right? Using the Azure environment, using LLMs in an Azure environment. It took 3 months to build. If they were to go out to market to procure and buy something, it would take them 6 to 9 months. So there is, if you know how you're building and you know what to build, and you know how to work with lawyers, you can build this very rapidly. And then at the end of it, we were getting adoption where today now we're processing anywhere between 300 adjudication cases per week and anywhere around 15,000 documents per week on the platform, because a team of 25, 30 adjudicators are using it day in, day out. So that's the benefit, that if you take this approach of targeted use cases with bespoke solutions, you end up with adoption baked in, and then that's the ultimate goal.
Well, yeah, that's a challenge from both sides. This all reminds me of rental and ownership uh, question, whether to own or rent an apartment or a house.
Yeah.
You always need to decide. And I see that there is a great trend nowadays to rent, not to own. And
Mhm.
it's been implemented throughout the society. That's maybe also the problem why people are tend to actually rent by in this case.
Yeah, and
Well,
renting, yeah, because when you're buying software, you're basically renting from the vendor,
yes,
right?
exactly. In this particular case, it's renting buying is totally the same thing
Mhm.
because you're not an owner of the product. You're not a
Yeah,
and
and
you're actually delegating a lot of own, let's say, assets that are of great value to someone
yeah,
else.
but then I asked this as a silly question, but then that's with property. But then if you have something significant and strategic in your life, like let's say your spouse or your child, right? Is that something you would rent? And
Yeah,
is AI for law firms just like property where they can think about just renting it and that's sufficient, or is it something more intimate like a spouse or a child where they would want where renting it might be questionable, right?
yeah, that's a tough question. Yeah, yeah, I do agree. I do agree. We have a question from the audience from
Mhm.
Sean Jardine. What does an AI strategy look like with regards to the pricing of legal services? I find many firms are aware that the billable hour is under threat, but have no idea to price their outputs.
Yeah, so this is a good question, and I think it's a question which has to happen at like the highest echelons of a law firm, because it basically means structurally as a business, law firms have to think about what they're doing and how they're doing and how AI will affect that. And there's been lots of talk about the billable hour, but I don't really want to get into that. But I think the pricing conversations need to happen around legal services. But I think people need to get their grips, get their heads around what AI can actually enable by getting either by buying something or building something and getting their hands dirty. Then that will help inform them how to think about pricing, right? Because a lot of times these conversations are in the abstract. The AI is this cool technology, it can affect pricing, but if you've not actually been through the process of building something with AI or actually using the technology in live legal services, then you won't actually see how the conversation makes sense, right? So I would recommend people to actually get involved in actually either building with AI or buying AI and getting it in legal services, and then think about the pricing question in tandem. What we're seeing is that law firms, especially in the mid-market, what we're seeing is that law firms who do fixed fee pricing for some kind of volume work, they're able to see a lot more gain and benefit from AI purely from a kind of a business standpoint because they're able to reduce their costs and they can increase their margins significantly by using technology. And sometimes it's not always about money, right? It's not always about pricing. Sometimes it's about efficiency. So this adjudication team I mentioned that we built this solution for, they have a regulatory requirement to turn around adjudication dispute, a tenancy dispute, end of tenancy disputes within 28 days. So for them, it's an efficiency requirement, not necessarily kind of a money question. So I think that the money question is important, but I think those are like structural problems within the legal industry that will take a long time for firms to get their head around and make sense of and like fix, if that makes sense.
Understood. Okay. Well, that's something to think about, definitely for many law firms. And that's a great topic also to discuss at Future Law next year.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, but overall, what do you think? What can we do to do at the start to boost adoption of legal AI in a proper way and to shift minds towards wise use of tech stack within your law firm?
I think education, right? So education, I always come back to education because I think the there is a massive disconnect between people's understanding of AI and where their understanding of AI needs to be to actually make the most of it, right? Like all of the stuff we've spoken about today, like the build versus buy, this whole kind of legal AI stack, everything we've been speaking about around the pros and cons of building and buying, right? A lot of times the decision makers, sometimes when making these decisions, they don't have visibility into all of these questions, not because they're not clever people, it's just because it's such a new technology that it's hard to get your head around. So I think getting as educated about AI as possible, and that doesn't just mean like reading stuff or learning stuff or watching videos and things like that. I think it also means getting practical in terms of can you run, for example, a pilot just to learn about AI systems? Can you, for example, try building a small AI application within your law firm just to understand and learn about what goes into it, right? So learning about AI is also about getting practical and hands-on. And I think once you're able to go through those motions of testing things, trying things, being able to get your hands dirty, then you'll be much more informed about the market, about what's available, and about how to go about it. Yeah, so I would say education's the key to progress. And that we've been saying this since we started Simplexico 3 years ago, that education is the key. And we want the industry to be in a space where everyone has kind of a very good and shared understanding of AI so that we can get into the ultimately the more interesting conversations around AI. And the technology has been here for 2, 3 years, but what we're still seeing is that people are not entirely familiar with the technology even still. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of getting people educated. But I think I'm I'm more than happy for people to reach out to me to speak to people to help them get their heads around things and understand how to go about doing AI or approaching AI within law firms and within legal teams.
And I can only second that your workshops were just amazing during our events. People left a lot of good feedback, and I really think that you are a great talent within the space. Thank you very much.
Thank
But
you.
we have another question from the same person, Sean Jardine. He's asking, what advice would you give to the head of pricing in a large law firm to get a seat at the AI strategy design table?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Um,
funny.
what advice would I give to the head of pricing at a law firm? I would say run a project, right? Find something within your law firm, which is like a lot of these discussions we have in the theoretical, and we can say this might happen, that might happen, it might affect pricing like this, or it might affect pricing like that, or the billable hour is going to die, and all of this stuff. But that's all in the theoretical. What I would recommend is trying to gain momentum by finding a small project within your law firm where AI could be introduced. For example, let's take that lease review example. Let's say this law firm does lease review, right? Law firm does lease review and then they charge by the hour. Okay. Take that as an opportunity to apply AI in that context. Maybe you buy something, maybe you prefer to build something, whatever it might be. I mean, building will probably be more fun. But you build something in that and run it as a sandbox project, maybe 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, just to try and build something quick and dirty and not for actually implementing AI, but for actually learning about it. And through that process, you'll learn more about how AI can impact pricing than you would by just thinking about it and having these abstract discussions. Because once you're able to get in the weeds of a project and with defined boundaries and defined context, then what you can do is you can basically say, okay, we have this lease review workflow. It takes us maybe 12 hours of work across associates to be able to produce a lease review, right? That's just the standard baseline. Now, if we introduce AI, we can take that from 12 hours down to maybe 3 hours of human time, and with a bit of AI, we can get a lease review out, right? And then as a law firm, we probably do maybe like 200 lease reviews a month, something like that. And then you can start thinking about doing the math in your mind around, okay, at the moment we're charging um, on an hourly basis and we charge 12 hours. Now, okay, if we're able to introduce AI, what does that mean in terms of how much we should charge? Should we maintain the 12 hours we charge, or should we move to another model where we're charging something fixed fee and then we can pick up the margins because we can do the rest of the work with AI? So the more concrete you can make the conversation around the use of computational AI, having more around pricing for the rest of the firm. Speaking about ROI, okay, so if we actually invest in building this AI solution, we can create or down from 12 human hours to three human hours. Because once you have those numbers, then it's so much easier to have a conversation at a strategy level and say, look, okay, we've got these cases. But this is we should rethink pricing particular piece of legal work. Be successful in one area within a law firm, then it's much easier to translate that across the entire law firm rather than speaking in the abstract. So my advice is always try and find something small and tangible where you can build experience around actually doing AI, and then take that with some tangible metrics to the board or to leadership, and then say, hey, is this something we can move in this direction?
Yes, I do agree. And by the way, I do not think that the billable hour model will cease to exist, but I do think it will shift its purpose. I think it will be a measure to evaluate the efficiency of a lawyer rather than to bill a client for the time spent. Because a fixed fee model will be a
Hmm.
trend, in my
Yeah,
point of view.
interesting.
Uh,
Mhm.
that's what clients actually require, and that's what is actually happening at the moment quite a lot. So let's see how it goes, how it evolves. But
Yeah.
that was a great conversation,
Lots
and
of lots.
yeah, and I think we should proceed with our observations and to look into adopting AI in a wise way with a proper strategy and overseeing also the goals and uh, processes within the law firm or legal department should also be the major point, the major start point to
Yeah.
do anything else. So, with that regard, I think we are on the right track, and we should keep going.
It's still, in my view, it's still very early days. I think there's a lot that can be done with AI legal, and this is just the first. We're still learning how to crawl, right? We're not running yet. We're still learning how to crawl, and we're falling over. But I think we're making good progress.
Yeah, indeed, indeed.
Mm.
Thank you very much, Wise, for your time and for your
Thank you for
great
having me.
insights. It
Mhm.
was a great pleasure for me hosting you today. Let's keep going and let's head towards Future Law next year,
Mhm.
where we also will be hosting you as a speaker again. And hopefully, we will get even more insights by that time because things change fast.
Yeah.
And we will be definitely speaking about the most relevant things in legal AI nowadays.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you very
I'm looking forward to
much.
it.
Yeah, and have a great and wonderful day ahead of you.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Take care. Bye. Thanks for joining everyone. Bye.